Good morning. In a few weeks, when we observe Columbus Day, it will mark 520 years since our European ancestors began to invade this land. As a Christian, I think it is important for me to know the story of God's people found in the Bible. Likewise, as an inhabitant of South Central Texas, I think I should also know the story of the indigenous people who cared for this land. Like the story of Cain and Abel that we just heard, it is a sad story. And perhaps if we listen together, we too will hear our brothers and sisters' blood crying out to us from the ground. Almost 40 years after Columbus and his famous first voyage, in November of 1528, native peoples in Texas had their own first contact with Europeans. On Galveston Island, a few Karankawa men noticed a stranger moving amidst their homes, stealing pottery, a few fish, and a small dog. Already armed with bows and arrows, the men called to the stranger to stop, but he waved for them to follow. And only a small distance further, they discovered the shipwrecked crew of Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. The sailors were exhausted and starving. For their part, the Karankawas were surprised, but hospitable, and by bringing daily food and providing private housing, they quickly nursed the dependent Spaniards back to health. Now, the Karankawa were a coastal people who ranged from what we now call Galveston to Corpus Christi Bay. Inland from them, living in the vicinity of present-day Seguin, were various small bands of people whose names are recorded only in the diaries of early Spanish explorers. Because these groups and their unique cultures are now extinct, our best insights into their lives come from such diaries, which tell us at least two other things. One, that some inhabitants referred to the Guadalupe as, quote, the river of nuts. And two, that some local native people relied on pecans as a primary food source for 2 or more months of every year. It is also worth noting that there are linguists who believe that sign language originated among the native people of this area. Over time, as a result of raids by the armed and aggressive Apache people, slavery in the Spanish missions, and the impact of imported European diseases, the groups living around present-day Seguin dwindled in size, and they joined with other peoples from the north to become known as the Tonkawa, which is a Waco word meaning they all stay together. Over the years, the Tonkawa created a common culture, including a belief that they had been wolves before they were humans. Needing to remain mobile to thwart attacks by groups of Apache and later Comanche warriors, the Tonkawa did not farm but were hunters instead, just like wolves, whom they revered and did not kill. The Holocaust of native Texans is a complicated and lengthy story, and I won't attempt to summarize it aside from saying that Europeans immigrated with catastrophically different notions of warfare and ownership. They also brought deadly diseases that killed millions of people on this continent. In particular, the indigenous people of this area were so cosmopolitan, their trade partners stretching hundreds of miles in every direction, that diseases and death spread quickly. This year's Krost Symposium emphasizes the concept and the practice of restorative justice, an idea which has its roots in native peoples. Restorative justice encourages us not only to live fully in the present, but also to remember the past, to recall who lived in this place, what happened to them, and how. How do we reconcile with people who are no longer here? Remembering their story, remembering that my ancestors were on the winning side, and so therefore it is my story too, is a starting point, but surely not enough to restore justice all by itself. I am reminded and challenged both by the Bible and the Native Americans in my life to seek right relationships, the very foundation of restorative justice, relationships marked by balance and harmony with other people, and in fact, all of creation. As we remember the history of Native peoples of this place, here are a few examples of the opposite of right relationships, which the language of Christianity simply calls sin. Only a few years after Cabeza de Vaca's hospitable reception by the Karankawa, Hernando de Soto's gold hunting expedition made first contact with numerous native peoples across the southern United States. By the time they reached Texas, the group's reputation for theft, death, and destruction preceded them. Everywhere they went, they killed children, women, and men. They looted and burned villages, and they took large numbers of native people as slaves. These were not right relationships. Throughout Texas, the Spanish continually tried to build missions with the dual purpose of militarily controlling territory and evangelizing native people. Men were forced to build the very structures where they would later be taught the Christian faith, and women were routinely raped. The experience was so humiliating and degrading that many people ran away. These were not right relationships. 60 million buffalo once roamed the present-day United States, providing food, tools, clothing, and other supplies for native peoples in Texas and states on the plains. No part of this magnificent animal was wasted. But in the mid-1800s, professional hunters began killing large numbers of buffalo to supply demand for fur in Europe and the eastern United States. At the same time, the U.S. government began to encourage the extermination of the buffalo, realizing that it would cripple native peoples and force them to try to survive as farmers on reservations. By the 1890s, fewer than 1,000 buffalo remained, and the surviving native people were indeed confined to reservations. These were not right relationships. Finally, beginning with Sam Houston as the first president, the nation and later the state of Texas negotiated numerous treaties with native people, including the Tonkawa of this area. Texas and later the U.S. government broke or ignored every treaty, every agreement made with Texas natives, eventually forcing all but two small groups to relocate to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma, where promises continued to be broken as white settlers sought the most desirable land. From a peak of several 100,000 people in 1500, the state of Texas could claim only 470 people of Native American ancestry in 1900. These were not right relationships. Over the last few weeks, I've read several books about Native Americans in Texas. It has been a profoundly humbling and unsettling experience. Where was God? Why didn't the world turn?
4 years ago, an opportunity arose to deepen relationships between TLU and organizations in the community. Through listening to community leaders, a need was identified for 5 VISTA positions, or volunteers in service to America. Each position focused on promoting the Mexican-American culture, educating nonprofits on how to raise funds, mentoring in local schools, encouraging the TLU community to be more engaged in community service, or organizing neighborhoods to be more unified. The VISTA Partnership for a Better Seguin worked to bridge the gap between TLU and its home community. Through 3 years of dedicated work and the TLU and Seguin communities, I saw restorative justice in action. Just a mile from where we sit is a park in the midst of the poorest neighborhood in Seguin. 3 years ago, this park was overgrown with weeds. A maze of anthills wound through its property. Children were kept away from it, and locals warned you not to go there after dark. This park had been shunned by its neighbors and rejected by its city. Seeing this opportunity for growth, the first cohorts of VISTA decided that Bloomberg Park should be their group project. The VISTAs held work days and rallied community involvement, which resulted in new paint, planting trees, a new water fountain, and a community garden. Residents from the neighborhood, student groups from TLU, and organizations throughout the city banded together to turn this park around. As a student, I attended a few of these work days at the park to paint fence posts, work in the community garden, and play with the neighborhood kids. As a VISTA, our cohort continued our predecessors' work to remind the city that this neighborhood and park is a part of Seguin and deserved fair attention and care. Events were held at Bloomberg to encourage neighbors to use the park once again and to deepen the sense of community. Partnerships with the local food council, the DARE program, and student groups like the Student Government Association, and many others made these events possible. Here, opportunities were made for relationships and community, and not just a couple of hours of manual labor. Through partnership, this park has been transformed. The well-kept lawn, basketball court, swings, and brightly colored playground beckon for youth to come play. Shaded picnic areas welcome families to rest, and a community garden invites everyone to tend and eat from its bounty. Here, right relationships are beginning to be restored. Here is where we continue to be friends and partners with our neighbors. This park's transformation reminds me that what may seem like small and insignificant actions to me now have a powerful influence on generations yet to come. As members of the TLU community, Bloomberg is not the only place to begin working towards right relationships here in Seguin. There are countless other organizations that work towards improving the lives of others in this community. And I invite you to chat with our interns in the back after chapel about how you can get involved and be a part of the restorative work that has already begun here. We have a distinct blessing and opportunity to serve alongside our neighbors here. May our hearts and our eyes be opened on how to walk with the least of these.